Rakers, Part 1, Next Job. Chapter 1. Dinner time. The doorman and the hostess were innocent, as were the diners in the small front room of the restaurant, a splashy place with old-style lights, cream-colored walls dotted with art for sale, and a menu printed daily. Fade only knew the last because they gave him one when he sat down at the bar. The drinks were on the back, and the date made itself known in thick block letters on the top. Beneath it, prices approaching a catastrophic level, laid out in bold. So Fade called for a shot of cheap vodka, left a 5 on the counter, and went into the private room to ruin the evening for everyone. 4 gentlemen, as Fade called anyone in a suit, hunched over dinners around a square oak table. Fade noticed they'd scattered crumbs across the table's shimmering finish. Drops of red wine from careless pours speckled the surface. Sloppy. The 4 turned to regard him together, their mouths in various states of chewing. Fade centered his own stare on one in the back corner, in clear need of dental work to repair some front teeth fleeing from his gums. Their eyes tracked to Fade's, and he watched as their expressions transformed from curiosity to confusion to fear. Those wide, shocked whites told Fade it was time to start. "Evening, gentlemen," Fade said, shutting the door behind him. "Seems you found yourselves on the wrong end of someone else's money." "The hell are you?" slurred the guy closest to him. The sliding of syllables matched the empty bottle on the table, a second one half gone. The other 3 waited to see what answer their champion would get. Fade leaned in, slid the brass knuckles around his palm and over his fingers, and socked the guy, knocked him and his chair over. The man's legs flew up as he flew down, hit the table, and toppled his glass, half filled with wine, over the edge and onto that nice suit and his white shirt. Of the 3 others at the table, one, the farthest with the odd teeth, managed to take another nervous chew before it all fell apart. The suit to Fade's right pushed back from the table, his left hand reaching inside his jacket for what Fade presumed was a gun. Not what this fight needed. Fade grabbed the fallen man's plate and whipped it across the table. It struck gun guy's forehead and shattered. Fade caught the man's fading eyes just long enough to confirm consciousness had left the scene before he turned to the last 2. Unlike their courageous, plate-crushed comrade, these 2 understood. They held up their hands, waited for the demands. "Appreciate it, fellas," Fade said, stepping over Wine Guy. "Unfortunately, I'm not being paid to take you hostage, or to rob you." The 3rd man lowered his hands slightly, confused. That lasted till Fade delivered another knuckle strike, sending the man to kiss the floor like his pal. No spilled wine this time, though. "What do you want?" the last guy, whose teeth seemed destined to haunt Fade's nightmares, said. "Not me, you should be asking." Fade paused, reached in his pocket and pulled out a small card. "The person who wanted this done, you can talk to him. His name's Ellsworth. He told me to tell you." To his credit, upon hearing Ellsworth's name, the toothy man put down his arms, nodded at Fade. "Go ahead." Except when Fade pulled his arm back to toss another strike, the toothy guy grabbed his steak knife and jabbed it at Fade's chest. Would have worked if toothy guy had ever stabbed a man before, if he knew how to use a knife to cut something other than New York strips. The fatal flaw? Hesitation, fear of the unknown, made the toothy man's attack go a bit too slow and gave Fade plenty of time to catch the man's wrist with his left hand, slammed the knife back down on the table, and delivered the knuckle strike anyway. 4 targets, 4 down. Fade spent the next minute rifling their pockets, digging through wallets, taking cash, a couple of gift cards. Their phones were nice. They'd sell. And when he was done, Fade reached into his own wallet and pulled out a small series of business cards, all with the same number printed on them, a number that went to a voicemail with nothing but a tone. He liked to think of these as auditions for future clients. Fade checked his watch, a plastic number that nonetheless held up under repeated violent assault. 5 minutes since he'd gone through the door, which meant Fade was overdue for an exit. He made his striding out of the room, gave the hostess a smile and a wave on the way out, tossed $1 to the doorman. They seemed nice. Chapter 2. Deals and drinks. Gills was the sort of bar where people of a certain repute gathered to talk of things with great consequence to themselves and little consequence to anyone else. TVs scrounged from secondhand stores clung to walls and silently screamed sports at the few patrons. Crusty black plastic tables sprawled, still sporting napkin holders, though Gills had shuttered its kitchen when the health department fines, so fate had heard, overcame the profits. Smoke lingered in the ceiling, the glasses, the jackets, despite being damned by a government ban some years back. Neon signs pitched to the 10 people squaring up at tables or the bar, slugging beer from cans or sipping shooters of stiffer stuff. Everyone waiting for a call, a visit, another hour to pass by. Fade's target slouched over the bar, buried deep in her phone, a murky glass of red beside her. Thalia complimented her beverage selection with her worn black leather jacket and jeans. Hair cut short to keep it, as Thalia said, out of the way. Anyone else came into Jill's and ordered wine, they'd get a laugh, a snide look. Thalia they left alone, save when she wanted another pour. Then she didn't have to ask. No round for me? Fade took a seat next to his partner. Didn't know if you were going to make it, Thalia said, not looking up from her phone. You decide to talk to them for a while? Get friendly? They were in the middle of dinner, Fade replied. Seemed cruel to take them before they'd try to bite. No reason to take a chance. Thalia took a sip from her drink. Shuddered. This is awful. You've had it before. No sympathy from me. I keep hoping one of these times they'll actually give me wine. Thalia glared at the glass. This tastes more like ocean spray and dime tap thrown together. While you're sipping that swill, take a look at these. Fade pulled the phones he'd taken out of his pocket, spread them out on the bar in front of Thalia. The bartender took one glance over, caught Fade's raised finger for a drink, and went to it. No questions asked. Nobody else in the place, as Fade ran his eyes around, appeared to be looking, appeared to care. Gills was his favorite bar. I can move these, Thalia said. We split the usual way? Sometimes, given that I'm the one beating the crap out of these people, I feel like I should get more than 50%. 100% of nothing is still nothing, Thalia said. Good point. This is why you handle the money. Fade nabbed the glass the bartender sent down to him, knocked back the vodka, embraced the fire as it burned its way into his stomach, and loved every second of it. Anything else, Thalia said? Any complications? Can I give Ellsworth the green light? They got the message, Fade said. Thalia nodded, typed something on her phone and sent it, slipped the device back in her pocket and started putting the other phones away too. Took another sip of the wine, didn't shudder so much this time. If you do anything bad for long enough, you get used to it. Seeing Jaycee tonight? Thalia said. Hoping to, Fade replied. It is a school night after all. Like that's stopped you before. You calling me a bad father? Fade said. Jaycee's only 16. She shouldn't have to take care of herself every night. You book the jobs. I tell you what's out there. You're the one filling the calendar. Fade glanced at a TV. Some baseball game highlights. He tried to wait for the score to pop up so he'd have something he could talk about to Jaycee that didn't involve booze or beating people up in back rooms. Failed. Not trying to be hard on you, Thalia continued after a second's dead silence. Keeping our bank accounts bursting is awfully nice. Just feel like if I'm not the one warning you to check in on your daughter every now and then, nobody's going to. Fade nodded, raised a finger for a second round. Guess what happened tonight? Fade said as he sipped it. Thalia rested her head on her elbow, eyes tracking from him to the wine and back again. What? I threw a plate, Fade said. Guy tried to pull a gun. Now there's ceramic sticking out of his face. An image I was waiting for. Pretty quick thinking, right? Thalia's eyes had a bit of amusement in them. Fade chalked the comment up as less than a total loss. Thematic, I suppose, Thalia said, throwing a plate at a dinner fight. Then her mouth fell to a straight line. You're seeing guns more often, Fade. Might want to think about carrying one yourself. I'm not good with them, Fade said. I'd wind up shooting myself. Ever hear of a practice range? They'll help you, Talia replied. This from the woman that wants me to spend more time with my daughter? You won't have any if the next guy puts a round in you from across the room. Fade finished the drink, stood back from the bar. The conversation going down a road he didn't feel like traveling tonight. Call me if something comes up. I can make some room, and I'm all about charging double for rush jobs. Don't worry, Talia finished her wine. Stared at the empty glass, bits of lipstick clinging to the rim. I've got you on speed dial. Speed dial? Careful, Talia. You're dating yourself, Fade said, making a show of looking at the quiet bar. None of these princely customers are going to find that attractive. Quit being an ass, Fade. You asked the impossible. Fade tossed a cheap goodbye on the bar and left, back out into the night to his car in the long road home. Chapter 3. Offers aplenty. Talia had barely seen the door shut behind Fade when another larger man took his stool. A heavy coat, too heavy for the cool coast weather, layered underneath the man's brimmed hat, like someone trying to impersonate a 20s gangster without realizing the setting didn't support the look. Talia continued into the new glass of wine, which hadn't improved with a few seconds' age. Turned back to her phone. Some people weren't worth starting a conversation with. Some people start one anyway. So that's your partner, the man said, his voice a smoky roll of cigars and booze. Don't see you bringing him to any of the reunions. He's just business. Talia kept her eyes on the phone, hoping, praying a message would come in. Something that would take her away for a minute. She kept her fingers scrolling through old emails, trying to appear busy. It always starts that way, the man said, but eventually your partners become your family, sometimes the only ones you've got. Get to the point, Talia said. The man took a long swallow of his pale beer. Talia noted that he didn't quite capture all of it, drops falling onto a stained cream shirt, dribbling around his large round chin, details she captured without trying, without wanting to, instinct. You know the point. You know why I'm here, the man said, then adjusted on the stool, wiped his face. Those are an awful lot of phones for one person. All to get free from you, Talia replied. Realizing the conversation wasn't going to float away, she blanked her phone's screen and shoved it inside a pocket, stared at the liquor bottles across the bar, the man's reflection in their labeled glasses. You ready for that yet? The man said the words knowing what Talia's answer would be, knowing the answer that she had to give. So Talia said nothing, took another drink of her wine. That's what I thought, the man continued. But here's the thing, you're not a kid anymore. I don't need to cut you any slack, so you're either going to take my offer or I'm cutting you off. Talia had waited for those words for a long time, years. Yet for some reason, still, when the words floated through the air to her ears, scratching nails ran around her chest. It was really happening, that last tie unraveling for her. What do you want me to do? Talia wasn't sure why she asked. Perhaps some sort of last gasp, a chance to hold on. Hated herself for it, but desperation often makes a mockery of courage. Rent still came due, independence or no. Come back, the man said. There's a place for you. That's not going to happen, Talia countered. The man waited a moment, gave Talia a chance to reconsider. Then he downed the rest of his beer, pulled his bulk off the stool. Fine. I don't play around when it comes to these things. You're on a list now. We don't forget the ones who leave. Why do you even care? Because others may get ideas, the man said. And you just became my prime example. If I'm willing to get rid of my own niece, well, none of the others are going to stray an inch. I'd like to see you try. As Talia said the words, her left hand drifted beneath her jacket, gripped the gun lying in her shoulder holster, ready to draw and fire if her uncle decided to make a move. The man gave her a sick grin. Remember, this is all your choice, her uncle said as he stood up from the bar. Left by the only door, Talia stayed at the bar for another minute. That's how long it took for her to relax the grip on the pistol, for her right hand to bring the glass to her lips one more time, the red liquid coursing through her mouth and her stomach, and washing away the concern that had lodged there. Long enough for her phone to beep. for a short message, a number, for a job to come in. Chapter 4. Takeout. Somewhere along the line, the evening had decided to rain. The drops came in fat and heavy, splattering against Fade's windshield like bombs. Useless ones going by the amount of bug guts still sticking to the glass in front of him. Fade pulled back on the lever, hoping his wipers would do their work, but no fluid came out. The right wiper stayed stubbornly put. At the same time, the CD started to skip, repeating Lewis's blaring trumpet blast, as though the legend were announcing some sort of ancient royal to court. In retaliation, Fade downshifted and kicked the car around a minivan, intent on trundling along in front of him. Swerved back into his own lane before an oncoming garbage truck, why was that going this late, turned him into mush. Still had time to brake before hitting a red light patrolling an intersection of soft restaurant lighting, gliding back into suburbia. The phone buzzed. Jaycee. Fade jammed his finger at the thing, turning on speaker as the phone sat in his cup holder. Or, given the amount of leaked coffee and soda, stuck to it. On my way, Fade said by way of hello. Was about to ask if you wanted dinner? Jaycee's voice came through with unnatural pep. How she had so much energy at all times, Fade didn't know. Drugs, he suspected, but Thalia kept telling him kids were just this way. What's on the menu? Whatever you can pick up. Jaycee's voice held that all-too-innocent twinge, that hopeful tone wishing that Fade would happily press on with the idea. Where'd my groceries go? Fade said. Then the phone buzzed again. Thalia calling. That's, my other question, Jaycee said as Fade reached to press the button. Thalia's ringing. I'll call you back. But the ovens burn. Jaycee's voice cut off as Fade punched the button. Then he realized what Jaycee had said. Then the minivan behind him honked, and Fade lurched the car forward. Thalia, Fade started. Fade, this is a big one, and they want it tonight, or I wouldn't have called so fast. Thalia spoke quick, her voice playing over with spilled sounds from the street. She'd gone outside, Fade realized, which meant the deal was sensitive. Couldn't chance someone overhearing it. Jaycee might be burning my house down, Fade replied. It'll last a while longer, Thalia said. The minivan was riding him, those bright lights at the perfect height to shine through Fade's back windshield. Blinding. He stole a glance at the speedometer. 10 under. He goosed the gas and the van fell back. I'm charging you for every charred bit, Fade said. The phone buzzed again. Jaycee calling back. It's Ellsworth. Says you aced it tonight, Thalia was talking. Fade could only picture his bedroom in flames. His nice suit, hand-tailored, turning to ash because Jaycee had broiled instead of baked. Sorry, 1 second. Fade jammed his phone again. Jaycee, what the hell? I'm feeling tacos. Jaycee had no panic, no scare in her voice. Can you get tacos? What about the house? Where's the fire? Oh, that, Jaycee paused. The phone buzzed. Thalia. Fade remembered he was driving and looked up into the blaring red of another intersection. Hit the brakes. Slid on the rain. A car shot by in front of him. Horn screaming. There's no fire. No fire? Fade briefly pondered the stupidity of beating 4 lethal thugs without a scratch and then dying in a car accident. The phone still buzzed. Yeah, I was just joking. Fade punched his phone again. Flipped back to Thalia. Ellsworth, what does he want? Fade said. There's a party, Thalia said. Happening tonight. On a Tuesday? Kids do the darndest things, Thalia replied. Don't tell me about it, Fade said. What's he want? The light flipped green. Fade caught the swap and went ahead. Then realized he was supposed to take a left. Damn it. The rain came down harder, as though it was matching his mood. The host, a girl. He wants you to take her to an address that I'll send along. Thalia paused. Fade, what are you doing? She must have heard him swearing. Fade stared, moved slowly, that minivan riding him again. Needed a spot to turn around. Trying to survive, Thalia, Fade replied. The phone started buzzing again. Jaycee. Right. Think you can do it? The money's big. Ellsworth's willing to cover the rush job. Send me the details, Fade said. A break in traffic. He turned hard left, bounced up the drive, and stared at the sign in front of him, where he'd just pulled into, Cortez's Cantina. He answered the phone. So, about those tacos? Chapter 5. Convenient calls. Jaycee had regrets about the tacos. Cortez's Cantina was not what she'd had in mind when, in a fit of craving for spicy salsa and a crisp tortilla, she had shut the refrigerator on her dad's bundle of groceries. The idea being to substitute, something delicious and easy in place of a scattershot attempt to mold random ingredients into a dish that wouldn't make her ill. Cortez's Cantina, though, lived in that hazy stratum for cuisine best indulged after the witching hour, when whatever disappointment came from the food was likely to be overwhelmed by the night's previous events. Instead, she had greasy meat slathered on hard shells that shattered with the slightest touch. "So talk to me," Fade said, as he laid the platter on the four-person table with mismatched chairs. Two of them explored the depths of dark wood, as though procured from a haunted forest furniture store. One had a tan cast, like it had been bleached on a beach for a decade. The fourth, going by the wistful look that came over Fade's eyes whenever they landed on it, must have been tied to some memory Jaycee hadn't qualified to hear. It bore more than its share of nicks and knacks, faded stickers, and stains of indeterminate origin. A chair worth 1,000 words, which was, more or less, the guiding principle of their house. A thin place on a quiet street full of mementos to memories Jaycee had minimal part of. That Fade seemed to drift in and out of as long as he was in the place, which he avoided as much as possible. Why have a home that you didn't want? Jaycee didn't know, but then her dad had to be pushing 40, and there was a lot of time for her to get from here to there. About my day? Jaycee sat across from Fade, dished him a plate. No silverware necessary for the tacos, just hands. She'd washed hers. Didn't notice if her dad had done the same. Anything, really. Fade took a taco, a beef-stuffed thing coated with cheese and vegetables that looked as though 1,000 chemical processes had robbed it of any natural qualities. "They're allowing sophomores to go to the prom this year," Jaycee said. If you'd pinned her against the wall and asked her why she'd opened with that statement, one that directly led towards every conversation she never wanted to have with her father, Jaycee couldn't have told you. Maybe because since it had been announced that morning, it had been all her friends had talked about. Until Allie mentioned the party tonight. The friend of a friend of a friend up on the hill. Prom? Fade snapped back into focus, his eyes sliding up from the taco to Jaycee's face. She tried to look innocent. Failed. "You trying to get a date?" "Are you saying that I'd have to try, Dad?" Jaycee replied, trying to think of a way out of the conversation. Should she spill a taco on the floor? Tempting, but that meant losing a taco. Not worth it. Yet. "I'm not saying anything." Fade bit down into his taco. Reached for the soda he'd picked up with it. Slurped on the straw. "If I choose to go, then yes, I'll find a date." Jaycee lunged at the chance to change the topic. "What's going on in your world?" "Busy," Fade said, which threw Jaycee for a moment. Fade wasn't one to let Jaycee get away like that. She swore he delighted in trapping her into awkward conversations, getting her to admit that a game was trivial, that getting good grades mattered infinitely more in the long run than spending one more night out with friends, that eating taco takeout too often would ruin its salacious terribleness. "There's a thing I have to go to tonight." Jaycee's face flashed a huge smile before she killed it. Going tonight, Jaycee muttered a silent prayer to whatever God had given her this gift. Not that Fade didn't dash out the door all the time, but on this of all nights, for him to leave and give her an opening? Her eyes went to her phone, over on the counter where she grabbed the plates. Messages needed sending. "Don't act so disappointed," Fade continued. "I know we were going to hang out, catch that movie, but this is an important thing. Things. That's what her dad called them. All he did during the day and night was a thing." Jaycee had already tried snooping the sites, hunted for her dad on the career networks, searched his name. Nothing. Nada. Only some brief mentions in college papers of athletic prowess, judo competitions, and a fondness for wrestling. The Dean's List announcement in his hometown paper. What kind of thing? Jaycee asked. The usual. Ever going to tell me what that is? Maybe when you're older. Fade finished his first taco, started in on the second. So what are you going to do while I'm gone? Homework, probably. Jaycee had some geometry, an essay on the Great Depression, which despite what her friends said, wasn't what happened after her 8th grade breakup with Wade Latz. None of it would happen tonight, though. Fade grilled Jaycee a bit about the work anyway, trying to fulfill the minimum dad quota, no doubt. Jaycee knew Fade felt plenty of guilt over how the nights and days passed by without filling up photo albums full of memories. She could see it in the random gifts he bought her, sure, but more in the conversations Fade had with himself, late at night when he thought Jaycee was asleep in her bedroom. Only the walls weren't that thick in the house, and Fade tended to get himself worked up. Her mother was gone and not in the way where she might come through the door one night, and her dad didn't want to let her go. In this, as with many things, Jaycee was content to let it be. When Fade stood up from the table a couple of minutes later, the breadth and scope of the homework having been skimmed over, Jaycee gave him a quick hug and ushered him out the door. Grabbed her phone and went upstairs. The reply came fast. She'd have 20 minutes till her ride showed up. As Tuesdays went, this was shaping up to be a good one. Chapter 6. Party Panic. Fade rolled the car by the party house, wondering how he was going to sneak in past a bunch of high schoolers. Armed guards, vicious gangsters, bloodthirsty dogs, all of those were fine. All of those could be handled. Teenagers, though, were off the map. He could knock them out, sure, but beating up children seemed like a poor choice. They also wouldn't hesitate to call the police, seeing as these kids probably weren't criminals. When Fade hit the end of the block, a sleepy one, aside from the splashy colors radiating out from the party house, he pulled back around and parked against the curb a few houses away. Close enough to have eyes on the target, but unless one of the kids decided to take a slow survey of the block, invisible to anyone in the house. Fade picked up the phone, punched in Thalia's name. I need to be 16 again, Fade said when Thalia picked up. You and me both. Any thoughts on how to get into this thing? What sort of thing is it? Thalia said, and Fade caught the barest hint of the whine on Thalia's voice. Interesting. Not normally one to conduct business while buzzed. Made aiming difficult. Cut reaction time. All the usual caveats. Then again, a bit of the strong stuff made the consequences easier to handle too. The kind of thing I didn't go to. I didn't know you in high school, Fade. Let's just say I wasn't in the rave circuit. Not that Fade had been in any circuit. High school, what Fade remembered of it, had been like all of his other stops. A blur of different towns, different crowds, and expectations that had nothing to do with geometry homework. Then again, when your parents can't tell you what they do for a job, that's to be expected. You can't scale the house? Go in a window? I'm in suburban hell. Half of these places probably have motion sensor lights. Neighborhood watch with trigger fingers. Even though they couldn't tell him what they did, Fade still had to prep to step into their shoes. Take the languages. Read this book and that one. Didn't matter what he was assigned. No time for anything other than studying. Because, damn it, there's nothing more important than that for your future. He wondered what they'd say if they could see him now, staking out a teenager's party to get a grubby stack of cash. They wouldn't have understood anyway. The things we do to keep our lives where we want them. You could pretend to be the police. Noise complaint. That'd probably get her to the front door. Forgot my cop costumes at home. Fade, I'm trying to help you do your job here. Don't need to give me crap for it. Fair enough. Fade sat back in the seat, stared at the house. The garage was on the left of the door. Two-car. A small balcony hung over the front door, covered with ivy all Romeo and Juliet style. Might be possible to get on the garage roof, take a jump out front and grab the balcony. Scale it. A couple of thumps brought Fade's vision back to street level. Another parked car, another kid quartet going in to celebrate their Tuesday night. Who holds parties on a Tuesday? Fade said. Veronica Pline, apparently. Wait, the billionaire's kid? Fade recalled the tabloids, They're in the grocery store checkout line. Pline pasted all over their covers some weeks, a family of disasters and delights, at least going by the headlines. Faye didn't think he'd ever bought a copy. She's got her own Wikipedia page already. Another car rolling up, the clock pushing 9. The rate of these new visitors, Fade wasn't going to get up on the roof, much less the balcony, without someone seeing him. He watched the car park just past the driveway. 2 kids getting out, girls, one hair bobbing down around her shoulders, looking awfully familiar. "Hey," Fade said, interrupting Thalia's recitation of Veronica Pline's various claims to infamy. "I think Jaycee just arrived." Silence. Fade played over various ways he could get Jaycee to admit just what she'd been doing on a Tuesday night. There couldn't be a straight-out accusation. No, there had to be cause. He and Jaycee had a mutual respect for the realities of life. Father's privilege didn't go far with her. "She's your way in," Thalia rushed the words, like she knew they weren't the right thing to say. "You want me to use my daughter? This'll pay her tuition. In a way, she's working for herself. When she tries to kill me later, I'm telling her this was your idea. I believe you were the one who agreed to this. Let me know how it goes." Thalia hung up, pushing him back to the mission. "Fine." Fade clicked his way out of the car, shut the door, looked at himself in the streetlight. Workman's jacket on to keep the cool night air at bay. Collared shirt underneath to qualify for the dinner's dress code. Jeans and a pair of shoes that looked formal, but in practice let him run a sub-4 mile if he needed to. Yeah, he could swing being the concerned father. Walked along the sidewalk. Fade glanced at the other houses. Lights on. One looking like the family was cleaning up after dinner. Pair of tykes running back and forth with dishes. The one across the way, next to the party house, had sprinklers going. All so quaint. All so perfect. And then Veronica Pline and her disco rocket. Fade stood directly across from her house now. The curtains drawn, but that was like trying to shade the sun with a piece of tissue paper. Swirling colors, the soft thump of bass rattling the concrete even this far away. Fade glanced up and down the street. Safe to cross. Up the driveway, hands out of his pockets. Forced a smile onto his lips. Stood in front of the door, hand raised. He'd knock and say what? "Hi, looking for Jaycee? I'm her dad? Hey, is Jaycee here? It's time for her to come home?" "What are you kids up to on a Tuesday night?" He'd broken down more doors than he could count. Busted in on meetings, deals, and fights. This was a job, Fade. Treat it like one. The smile vanished. His hand went to the knob, a silver, circular number. It turned. Fade opened the door and stepped into his own personal hell. Chapter 7. Teenage Dream. There were things about parties that Jaycee could, unequivocally, say that she enjoyed. The music, particularly the fast songs that ripped along to the lights and gave you that high-octane energy kiss. The people, seeing classmates outside of, class was like seeing a shy flower open up. Never knew what they closeted away inside the beige school walls. And of course, the randomness. "What's going to happen tonight?" Jaycee asked her friend and ride, Allie, as they stepped into Veronica Pline's foyer. Fake silk streamers in every color hung down from a small chandelier. Pictures crowded the white walls. Art, not photographs. Splashed up paintings, vistas tinted in unnatural ways. A stair climbed away to the right, a second floor a dozen carpeted steps away. An opening peeked into a reveling living room. "What's not going to happen, more like," Allie replied, her voice trailing off as they sided down a hallway. A truly marvelous assortment of things Jaycee's father would murder her for even contemplating. "You want to leave?" Jaycee asked the question to be polite. There were events to be had here, stories to be told. When Allie didn't say anything, Jaycee grabbed her wrist and pulled her forward. "Come on, let's just look around. If it's lame, we'll go." The hallway shot past a half-bath, door locked and in use, and through to a kitchen. And what a kitchen. Jaycee stole her eyes away from the platter of drugs and alcohol, spread beneath a folded paper that said, in curled cursive, "Help yourself," and looked at the immaculate arrangement of appliances. of blenders and peelers, pans hanging over a central island with a gas stove top, marble, or fake enough to convince her, countertops, a fridge that looked more like a computer. The highlight, of course, being Danny Jackals, standing there holding court over a pair of his favorite flunkies as they drained some red cups of drink. Danny Jackals, with his always styled hair spiking straight ahead, like a razor wave going towards a far... "You're staring," Allie whispered. "He's going to notice." "Maybe I want him to." But Jaycee looked away, back to the table with the cups, the vodka, the tiny bags of weed. "Are you having any?" Allie reached towards the cups but hesitated. "Do I ever? I just thought, with Danny here, my dad would kill me." Literally on the day Jaycee had turned 13, before he made her favorite breakfast, fate had sat her down and given her a clear rundown on the mortal danger that would be brought upon her should Jaycee indulge in any such substances. At least until she turned the proper age. There were some things that Fade said, where his mouth would curl up at the edges, or his eyes would shine, where she could tell he was kidding. This, though, this had been dropped on her like an anvil. No humor, no joke, just simple, dire, and damned effective. "Then would you mind driving?" Allie said. Jaycee shook her head, and Allie's keys hit her hand a second later. Her friend followed up with a cup of the hard stuff, drowned in a sugary bath of soda. Jaycee, for her part, snagged a cup of her own. It would serve as a disguise, and if that bathroom ever opened up, she'd fill it with water. Not her first party. "Hey, Danny," Jaycee announced, walking up to him, smiling at his friends. "How's the party? For a Tuesday? Killer." Danny's voice had that mellow vibe to it, as though he were stuck forever in a surfer movie. "You just get here?" Jaycee caught Allie moving around her, striking up a conversation with Danny's friends. She knew the game, fashionably late as always. Danny flashed a grin, raised his drink to his mouth, and took a long gulp. "So answer a question for me, Jaycee." "Yeah? How's that empty glass taste?" Jaycee flushed. "Come on, roll with it." "Pretty great, actually. I'm driving." "Driving when?" Danny glanced at the clock over the oven. "It's not even late yet." "It's not my car." "Time to flip this one." "So how do you know Veronica?" Danny shrugged. "I don't, and I'll never met her. I think people are just crashing this place. I heard she has these parties to meet people, you know, because otherwise everyone's too intimidated to talk to her." Intimidated? Veronica was a senior, so Jaycee didn't see much of her around the school. Couldn't verify Danny's theory. "Don't you know," Danny said, "you make Veronica mad, she'll make you disappear. Or her parents will. So you know, you gotta be careful. Doesn't do much for her making friends." "That sounds dumb. Then why don't you say hi to her?" "Dare you?" Jaycee rolled her eyes. "Sure, whatever." "Where is she?" Danny pointed at the ceiling. "Last I heard, upstairs. She hasn't been down since I got here. If you don't see me in 10 minutes, send help." Danny laughed. "Nice." Jaycee turned, went down the hallway, took a left, went up the stairs. She heard the front door open behind her, but didn't look back. Probably more people she didn't know. At the top of the stairs, the second floor commenced into a sharp hallway. An office on her left, bathroom and shower on her right, then the wide open door to the giant space that served as Veronica Pline's personal palace. Jaycee crept up to the door, peeked in. The room stood full of the sorts of things Jaycee would have if she could have whatever she wanted. Gadgets and posters, cascading layers of makeup and lipsticks, a full set of women's hockey equipment hanging from the far wall. A mirror taller than Jaycee herself stood between a pair of windows. A bed bigger than Jaycee's bedroom, covered in pillows. "Like it?" said a voice, sleek and sour, and Jaycee took a second to find its owner, hand over her phone, looking back at her from a screen door leading to the balcony. Yeah?" Jaycee answered Veronica. The hostess had a chic sweater on, from a brand beyond Jaycee's fashion sphere. Jeans and socks. Manicured but not overly made up, Veronica Pline struck Jaycee as a player in new worlds. as totally beyond Jaycee's reality as, say, the president or a movie star. That reflection didn't get much playtime. A hand landed on her shoulder and Jaycee jumped, turned to look impossibly into the angry eyes of her father. Chapter 8. Intro interrupted. Fade had to admit he rocked the stern father expression. Jaycee's eyes went so wide they looked like they took up about half of her head. Her mouth dropped open. Even a little gasp. Successful parenting. Right here. That's right, Jaycee, time to go. Fade nodded towards the stairs. How? Jaycee more mouthed than spoke, but Fade understood. Your dad's everywhere, knows everything, Fade said. Now get going. Jaycee, for her part, recovered quick, tilted her head. Aren't you driving me? Veronica Pline appeared in her bedroom doorway, hands spread and gripping either side of the frame, as though she was afraid she might fall right through. Fade caught her face, compared her with the picture Thalia had sent along of the target. Dead on. Young lady, Fade started. What are you doing in my house? Veronica said with all of the spine and none of the fear that high school kids should have had when talking to him. So Fade flipped the script. Getting my daughter back. Fade noticed Jaycee's eyes flip between the two of them. And wondering what you're doing with what's downstairs. Not sure all of that's legal for someone your age. Fade had been frankly impressed at the goods on display. He knew plenty of tough guys and rough customers that'd kill for a spread like that in their dens. He'd have to tell them that the kids in this town had it better than they did. What I'm doing is none of your business. Veronica flipped out her phone. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. The police? Fade raised both eyebrows. Seems like a risky move, what with, your supply down there. And Jaycee, I see you still here. Leave now. Jaycee finally took the hint, edged by Fade and vanished down the stairs. If Fade had played it correctly, the only person, once Jaycee left, who'd know he was here was Veronica, who wouldn't be here much longer. Jaycee wouldn't have to suffer the mortal embarrassment of high school films everywhere. An uncool parent. What do you want? Veronica said after Jaycee left. There are some people that want to talk to you, Fade said. They know your parents. I'm their driver. White lies grease the wheels, or so Fade always told himself. Who? I'm not paid to ask questions. Well, screw that then. Veronica pulled her phone up to her face. Fade heard a ringing noise. Didn't react. There are two ways this can go, Fade said as Veronica's phone continued to ring. You either come with me right now and nothing happens, or you play this game and somebody gets hurt. See? Veronica took a step back. That doesn't do a lot to support your argument. If you're willing to hurt me for these people, why wouldn't they do the same? Figured the daughter of smart people would be smart too, crap downstairs notwithstanding. Fade heard the phone click as he tried to think of something more persuasive. Yeah, Grady? Veronica said into the phone. There's some guy at my house. He's telling me I have to go with him. Threatening me, really. Fade heard a couple words and a click. So not the police. My parents have a payroll. Veronica leaned back against her far wall near a dresser. You've got a few minutes till they get back here, and then things get real bad for you. Can I ask you a question? Fade moved to the doorway. It's your time. Veronica shrugged. You're hosting a party, but you're up here in your room alone? Why? What do you care? Curious? Veronica stared at him. Fade honestly was curious too, but he was mostly buying time. Had to be sure Jaycee was long gone before he and Veronica split. If that meant Veronica's bodyguards had to take a couple punches, well, that's what they were there for. You know you're going to get worked over, right? Veronica said, and Fade picked out a wondering note in her voice. Grady works for my dad. He doesn't take threats nicely. I'll be fine. You going to give me an answer? All told, Fade wasn't looking to leave the house trashed or beat up a man in front of a bunch of kids. But for the amount of money Thalia was talking here, he'd put up with a lot. I don't like parties. Veronica glanced at her phone again. This is by far the most interesting time I've ever had at one. Then why host them? Because it's expected, Veronica sighed. Easiest way for people to like you, really, if you give them things. Ordinarily, I'd say that's a terrible way to make friends. But you've got the cash, so why not? Fade heard the front door shut, a car engine start up a moment later. Jaycee, or her friend, had parked near the house. Odds were she'd left, which meant it was time to go. He took a step into the bedroom and, faster than he thought possible, Veronica reached behind the dresser and pulled out a small snub-nosed revolver. Fade stared at the gun. "Did you fall out of the 1930s?" Fade asked. "I'm a better shot with this than you'd think," Veronica replied. "It'll kill at this distance." "I bet," Fade said. Then he darted forward and to the right. He wagered Miss Veronica Pline, 18-year-old reluctant socialite, wasn't going to be quick with the trigger. He wagered right. In a hot second, Fade had Veronica's left hand off the gun, the rest of her pinned back against the wall. Without letting her free, Fade set the gun on top of the dresser, pushed it out of her reach. Two ways to leave this place, quietly or unconscious. Your choice? "I'll go," Veronica said. "Smartest thing you've said all night." Fade pressed against her back and moved Veronica forward, reached over and took the phone out of Veronica's hand and stuffed it in his own pocket. The two of them walked along the hallway, and Veronica didn't fight him. Took a peek down the stairs. No students. Plenty of noise from the kitchen, the living room. "Keep going. Down and out the door," Fade said. "Do I get to put on shoes?" "You do not. You know how expensive these socks are?" Fade glanced at her feet. The socks were purple. They were socks. "I do not, and I do not care." Veronica went down the steps, opened the door, and stepped out. Fade was right behind her. As she left, Fade saw Veronica's head turn slightly to the left. Nothing had been there except a bush, so Fade pushed the girl and ducked as he came out. The punch flew over his head, caught only air. Fade jabbed out with his left elbow, turning to see it hit the stomach of a large, annoyed-looking Irishman. Fade's elbow lost itself in the man's. Fade supposed this was Grady, belly. Grady's hands clamped down on Fade's arm, and the bodyguard whipped Fade forward. He rolled with the momentum, coming up on his feet next to Veronica, who was picking herself up from the grass. "The hell you doing, trying to kidnap a girl?" Grady asked, coming after Fade. However ball-like Grady might have been, the bodyguard carried the weight well, leveraged his bulk into a right hook that, Fade was sure, had felled many morons in Grady's assuredly vast history of bar fights. Unfortunately for Grady, all-out right hooks were Fade's favorite move to see. Fade sidestepped the punch, grabbed Grady's hitting arm, and pulled the man towards him, stuck out a leg and caught Grady's ankle, tripped the man into the grass. The fall spread out Grady's jacket, showing an impressive array of arms, including a taser and pepper spray. Fade nabbed the former as Grady started to push himself up. "You're a tricky punk, aren't you?" Grady muttered as he turned to look at Fade, who shot the taser into Grady's face. "Real tricky." Fade dropped the taser, which landed right in front of its owner's shaking body. Veronica stared at Grady, as if in shock, and didn't put up the slightest fight as Fade led her down the block into his car and started the engine. "See, that didn't have to happen," Fade said as he shifted into gear. "But you know what? It's done. Let's focus on the now, which includes some much-needed cash for me and a short ransom for you." Chapter 9. Money Meet. Thalia, sitting in her car around the corner from where Fade had parked his, watched her partner stick Veronica Pline into the passenger seat. Thalia picked up her phone, punched in the number the client, Ellsworth, had given her. A voice answered on the other end, stayed silent. "Ready for the next step," Thalia said. The man on the other end spat out an address. Thalia typed it out in a message to Fade. "So what are you going to do?" Thalia asked the nameless guy on the phone. "What you mean? What are we gonna do? You're not supposed to ask questions." "She's just a girl." Thalia started the car. Fade was already going down the block, and she didn't want to fall behind. "No, she's the daughter of a couple of really rich parents. We're going to see how much they love her is all." "Then you're not going to hurt her?" "Thalia," the man said the name like he knew her. Thalia tried to think of Ellsworth's flunkies, couldn't remember any. not worth her notice. You know what attracts attention more than kidnapping a rich girl? Hurting her. Nobody's going to care we take a few grand off people with more money than they can possibly spend. People are going to get real angry if we rough her up. She's going to be fine. I take that as a guarantee. Wouldn't want to make you angry, the man laughed. We'll be at the drop site in an hour. Keep her till then. The phone clicked. Thalia set it down, kept pace with Fade's car. Occasionally, when they passed a streetlight, she could see his arms moving, gesturing. Her partner liked to talk with his body, always made Thalia think he was going to hit someone, knock his glass off the table. One of his many quirks. Veronica looked stock still, Thalia able to see the back of her head poking over the seat whenever Fade drove by a streetlight. Fade would have clipped her, though, cuffed her to the door, kept it locked. Even so, Veronica might have been going along for the ride. Another story to tell her friends back at school. What was cooler than getting held for ransom? Thalia hadn't been in school for a long time. They coasted out of the suburbs into a more industrial district, heading closer to the port. Houses dropped away, replaced by stores, and then the dark, closed commercial enterprises that didn't play overnight. Sidewalks replaced by fences, asphalt lots full of trucks and pallets. Bright lights on the corners stuck up to show security cameras. This part of town wasn't well trafficked on a Tuesday night, even by muggers or more sinister elements. There just wasn't anything here worth stealing. They were taking a girl, and Thalia could only think of Veronica as a girl, legal, adult, or no, for money. Kidnapping wasn't the issue. She and Fade, they'd taken plenty of people that didn't belong in the open, people that had the wrong enemies. But Veronica, so far as Thalia could tell, so far as the internet revealed, she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd only been born to a couple people who had made a pile of cash. Now here she was, about to get a lifetime's worth of nightmares. Maybe after this one, Thalia would keep her and Fade away from jobs like this. Their souls were dirty enough as it was. Fade pulled up and into the drop point, a vacant dry dock in between ships. A large lattice of cranes and girders stood around them, bright white lights shining over the whole thing. In the distance, the bay waves lapped against concrete barriers, a soothing slap mingling with the churning fizz of running water. A pair of seagulls spooked as they came up, crying away into the night. Sea lions shouted at each other above the surf, having one of their nighttime conferences. Thalia came up a half block away from Fade's car, killing her lights when she realized they'd stopped. She slipped out, the overhead lights in her car staying off when the door opened, went to the trunk and popped it. Lifted a hard-shell case out of the back, set it on the roof of the car, and opened it. Inside was the sort of weapon that made her valuable. That could keep Fade safe. That was definitely outside the legal zone for firearms in the city. She set it up on the right side of the car, hidden from the view of any passing vehicle. Through the scope, she had plenty of view for the drop zone. She saw Fade get out of the car, start his walk. They had half an hour to kill before Ellsworth and his goons showed up. Time to check and make sure there weren't any surprises waiting. Deals were deals, but you never knew when someone planned to screw you over. That's why Thalia had dressed in black, why her car wouldn't draw attention, and why you'd have to stumble onto her in order to tell she was ready to blast any and all comers from distance. But she wasn't ready for what she saw. A pair of strange lookers walking around one of the girders, seemingly coming out of nowhere. One of them, a burly man, wearing a large, wide-brimmed hat, like he'd fallen out of one of her dad's Clint Eastwood movies. The other, a woman, had a blue athletic jacket and slick workout leggings, like characters from a bad advertisement. Thalia settled the scope on them as Fade turned to say hello. Ellsworth and his crew operated in suits. Thalia couldn't think of any elements that dressed like they were going to costume parties. She and Fade's contract had been interrupted. But by who? Chapter 10. Interlopers. Fade couldn't help but do a triple take. The two figures in front of him, who'd come striding out of nowhere like visions in a dream, did not belong here. One, a lanky, hairy man, appeared to be a lost extra from some western. The man even had bandoliers and a pair of holstered six-shooters. His partner, meanwhile, looked more like a background star in an 80s exercise video. All colored spandex, and was that a literal backpack? "Who are you two?" Fade said as they walked up. There were 1,000 things he wanted to append to that question. Critical mysteries such as, how did you choose to wear those things? Who decided you'd make a good hire? Can I borrow that hat? Fade added none of them. The woman spoke first, the man locking eyes with Fade and moving his mouth as though the cowboy wished he had some tobacco to chew. "You can call me Eve. This is Lode. And you are Fade?" Eve's voice came out formal, like she was reading a declaration. Lode, for his part, continued to stare. "You work for Ellsworth?" Fade shifted his weight to his left foot. Lode looked like he was planning where to plug him, and Fade had seen enough movies to know how fast they could draw one of those pistols. From this stance, and with the cowboy being only a couple of yards away, Fade figured he'd be able to beat any fast hands. "Answer the question," Lode said. Spoke like a barrel rolling down a hill, tumbling over the words with deep echoes. Fade noted his hands didn't twitch. The cowboy kept them loose at his sides. "Sure," Fade replied. "I'm Fade. What about it?" Eve made the first move. Fade had his eyes on Lode, but it was Spandex Woman that whipped off the backpack and threw it at Fade's face. He barely raised his arm to knock the backpack away, only to see Eve flying at him with a flurry of kicks. The first two connected, shots with Eve's left leg into Fade's side. They hurt, sure, but it wasn't anything Fade hadn't felt before. Shocks to the kidney, the stomach, they would hurt later. As Eve switched to her right leg, sweeping it low, Fade rushed the cowboy, dashed right beyond the range of Eve's foot. Lode raised his own fists, more of a boxing style, and Fade feinted in with a left hook. Lode shifted to block, and Fade kept moving. Swept past Lode and pushed the cowboy as he went, stumbling Lode away from him. If Thalia set up where she should have, both of these costume party crazies would be right in her sights, Fade clear of any shot. "Stop," Fade said as the pair turned back to him. "I'll give you those first two hits. Good moves, but you take one more step and you'll find yourself in a lot of pain." Eve quirked her head at him. "You are outnumbered. Don't know who you two are, but you have to work on your recon game." Fade stepped back a foot, wanted to give Thalia all the space and time she needed to ping one of them in the back. "If I raise my hand, you'll both be down in a second. So why don't we talk instead?" Lode squinted at him, a mean look complemented by the scruff and dirty white bandana tied around the man's neck. The cowboy really did belong on a movie set. Fade would have believed Lode had walked right out of a saloon. Next to him, Eve picked up her backpack from the ground. "A deal," Lode said. "You come with us, now, and we won't kill you in front of the girl." "The girl?" Fade blinked. "Ah, yes. Veronica, still locked in the car. If they didn't know who she was, then they definitely weren't Ellsworth's people. So who were they?" "Funny, I don't think you're in a position to make demands." Fade glanced over to the dark road. "More friends are coming soon, and I've got you pinned. So how about we do what I say?" Eve glanced at Lode. "There will be witnesses, but not many," Lode countered, "and he's the target." Fade looked from one of them to the other. "The target? You two are a giant riddle, you know that?" Eve turned back to him with a sad smile. "I would have enjoyed sparring with you, Fade." Before Fade could reply, Lode reached into his dusty jacket, pulled out what looked like, to Fade, a kazoo, a short blue plastic tube. Lode pointed it at Fade, which was enough of a sign that this conversation was over. Fade's hand shot up, 2 fingers, cleared non-lethal. Whomever these two worked for, Fade wanted to know, needed to know how they knew who he was. Thalia's shot cracked immediately, hit the cowboy in the back. Lode stumbled forward, and Fade could swear the man growled, but Lode still managed to aim that plastic tube at him. Fade stepped into a kick aimed right at Lode's hand to knock whatever it was away. How the cowboy could still stand after Thalia's rifle round struck him, Fade didn't know. For that matter, he didn't understand why the world went suddenly sideways. Why the white lights and the red girders around him blurred together. Why he couldn't feel his legs and his arms anymore. Why, though he thought he was falling, Fade didn't feel himself hit the ground.